So here we go. Hopefully we don't have too many problems. Let my let my dogs get out there and run around, do their thing. I've got the rowdy one right next to me here. All right. So let's see. So today the discussion is about centering a div and recursion, sorry, on the web. So that's the two topics. I don't know how we're gonna segue between them, but we'll just we'll make it work. Like I said, I did research on centering a div and didn't really think it really had all that much enough to carry an entire conversation. So we're gonna do a twofer here, mainly because I've seen some discussion on recursion uh, out there on X and other places. So, let me hang on here. Let me get the chat up so people can message. There we go. All right, so I can see people messaging. All right. Yeah. So I guess we might as well. I usually ramble for about a minute or two, give everyone who wants to watch live a chance to get in. But yeah, we'll start with centering a div. There are a couple of discussions. The I did promise it was a CSS only solution, and that is the case. I did have a couple people posting potential solutions, and while yes, those will work, the one I wanted to post was something that would work almost universally, to where you don't have a lot of the solutions involve doing things like setting a particular size of the div. Yeah, and in that case, those will work. But a lot of times you may not know the content that's going to be in a div, yet you still want it to be centered strictly based only on the content within the div. There's other interesting aspects to take place. The one I found on JS Fiddle, a site that, if those of you who don't know about it, would be a really good place to have an account. You can kind of play around with some JavaScript stuff. You can even bring in other libraries. You can just do some very basic prototyping on there. If you ever have a problem, you can use JS. A lot of times you'll see on some of the question and answer sites, you'll see people post a fiddle on there. They'll say, post your fiddle. So yeah, you can create, you can replicate an issue you're having and then share it without having to share all your code. So I guess I'm kind of selling JS Fiddle, but since I'm going to use them, I might as well talk about them and things like that so that people understand what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. There was just really it's a very simple problem what this is. I know a lot of people have problems with this, but the creation of it is actually quite simple. So we're going to use Fiddle for that. And then the recursion, I actually have some code in BSoft components, and we're going to use that to talk about recursion on the web and how that works. Even myself, when I learned a recursion, I didn't really believe that it had any place in websites until I started doing component development and things of that nature, and saw that there were issues that needed to be addressed in certain cases. And you'll see the case I'm talking about here once we present that, and how recursion can actually help. So without further ado, here we will share the fiddle. The first is going to be the fiddle. It's going to be the centering of the div. It's very simple. There's nothing really too advanced about it. So you're probably going to you won't be wowed over by the visual, but the concept is there. So that's what we will talk about now. All right. Sure, this looks good. Yep, we are looking good. All right. So, like I said, very, very basic concept here. You've got, and we're going to play around with this some and show multiple ways of doing this. This one is using the concept of absolute positioning. The CSS, the outer CSS here is not really all that important. This is just kind of setting up the little red box you see below here. As you can see, within the red box, the item here is positioned exactly center, both horizontally and vertically. If you see, the outer is positioned relative. Now, this is a very interesting thing that uh, that position, absolute position has to do with. Now, there's two ways. Okay, technically there's three ways. There's three ways, but there's two we're going to talk about today. There's two ways of positioning a div outside of using the normal markup flow. There is position absolute, position fixed. There's also a position which is relatively new, which is really freaking cool, called sticky. It used to be experimental, but it's now a normal part of the actual standard of CSS standard and all that. I could do a whole another thing on sticky. We won't even go into sticky, what sticky is, but today we're going to talk about absolute and fixed. To start off, absolute is a positioning based upon the document itself. So basically, when you say position absolute, your 0 point is the top left of the actual document, unless we are in the situation we are in right here. In the situation we're in right here, we are inside of a parent div that has a position set to relative. If the outer div here, if your actually absolute positioned element is inside of a div that is positioned relative, then its 0 point is not the upper left as you would see over in here, but is the upper left as you would see over in here. So if you take a look here, let's see if I can kind of pull this up and maybe be a little bit easier to see. There we go. As you see here, it's not centered on the screen. It's centered within the actual outer div, the div called outer here. And therefore it is centered there. Now, if we were to simply take the outer out, I'm going to put it back in afterwards, but if we were to take the outer out here like so, and this is why I use fiddle, because you can play around with it and you can get back to the original and all that. Now you see that it is centered directly on the screen because there is no longer a div that is contained within that is positioned relative. It takes its positioning right up here. So as you can see, we can't move, but it is dead center of the screen, both vertically and horizontally. So that's the whole point of absolute positioning, and that's how this works. The CSS to do this is really quite simple. Position absolute, left 50%. Of course that would happen. Left 50%, top 50%, and then transform, translate negative 50% on both sides. Don't ask me why this does this, how this works. I'd probably have to dig in. If I dug in, I'm sure I could tell you what the translate transform does and all that. But this wasn't about teaching everything like what translate does. This is about showing the CSS and how simple the CSS is for centering a div on the screen. Like I said, position absolute, left 50, left and top 50%, translate negative 50%. So basically, this is what centers a div directly on the screen, completely irrelevant of the content within the div. If we made the content more and we said, and here's a lot, here we go, like this, lot. Of course it wants to do that, lot more, like that, and then ran it. Hopefully we would get a resized div. So it resized, as you can see, but it still remains centered on the screen. It just resized it horizontally. I had to think between horizontal and vertical there. Yeah, so it redid it horizontally. The items down here aren't really important. Basically, this just makes sure that it takes up at least 50%. Max width, it says that it'll only take up at least 50%. So then it sets up scrolling and things like that. Honestly, text align center, I don't even understand why that's in there. But, border blue so you can see it, all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm going to bring back the divs that we had there. So let's go ahead and we'll undo everything here. There we are. That's back. We'll put it back to where it was. Now, the reason I did that is because the next positioning I want to talk about is, instead of position absolute, I want to talk about position fixed. Now, this is the one that I use inside of BSoft components. And the reason is fixed positioning, instead of positioning itself to the upper left of the document, it positions itself to the upper left of the window. Another reason I did this is for a very good purpose. I have a component inside of BSOS components called the overlay panel, and the overlay panel basically pops up. If you've looked at any of the BSOS component stuff, the date time component, the little selector that pops up, the thing it pops into is an overlay panel. And so the reason that I went down that path, because if you're going to use absolute positioned divs to do things like an overlay panel, what you have to do is you have to attach that div to the body element. So basically, you can't let it be added to anywhere within the normal flow because of the situation that we are in right here. If you happen to have a div that is relatively positioned, then your calculation will be on where your particular item is. But if you're inside of a div further up, or another element further up that is relatively positioned, then you're going to hit the problem where your positioning code is out of sync, because your positioning code, you're taking it from the 0 point at the top left of the document, but its actual calculations are going to be from that point there. So what you'll have is let's say you had your element right here that it was supposed to quote unquote attach to. What would happen is, instead of it rendering here, it would render about as far off as it is right there. So whatever the difference is here, you would see in the difference from here. So it would be about right here. And so your element's here, and this thing is over a little like that. So that's the issue you have with using absolute positioning. The solution to that is to then attach your div to the body element. The problem with that is, many times what happens is I end up having events to where I want to make sure that if you click, for example, the overlay panel has a piece that says if you click outside of the overlay panel, then it's supposed to close. That's one of the ways to dismiss the selector, is to click away from it. You can make a selection, but you can also click away from it. And if you click away from it, then it's supposed to close. Well, now, if you add your overlay panel to the body element, but you have your actual selectors inside somewhere else, what will happen is, sometimes if you click inside of the actual overlay panel, technically the overlay panel is attached to the body, and so clicking here, what we do is we do a test whenever there's a click, and we do a test that says, is the click outside? There's actually a DOM element. There's actually pieces of JavaScript that actually can do this for you. So I don't do any of this myself. There's actually some JavaScript methods. I'd have to look them up and show you, but basically you're checking, is the click inside of this main element? And technically, since it's attached to the body and it's not part of your main component, if you click away, for example, if I click on the actual box, I don't want the selector to hide. So the way I would end up doing that is I would say, is it outside of this? If that's attached to the body, that click would then respond to it being outside of the area and would close. And that's what was happening. It was always closing because since I was using absolute positioning, I had to attach it to the body. This is why I went to fixed positioning. So I'm going to leave the outer item here, and we're going to move this from absolute to fixed positioning. So if we move that to fixed positioning and we run it, there you go. Now it is no longer using that. Now it no longer takes this outer relative position div into account, since it's fixed position. It is taking its positioning from top left here. Now, fixed positioning has the exact same problem with well, I wouldn't call it a problem, but it has the exact same situation with absolute positioning, and I believe it's in there's another property, and it's an animation related property. I know that because inside at my full-time client, which is Myosh, we have a modal dialogue, and we did the same kind of positioning with the modal dialogue and it was fixed positioning. We were using position fixed as well, and we had some kind of transition. I think that's what it is. That's what it is. It's the transition property, and we had a transition to give it a nice looking transition when it came into view. And so, and when left view, it kind of fades out. You've seen these type of views in on your iPhone and things like that. When you pop and it kind of it doesn't just go boom and disappear. It kind of fades into the distance. That's kind of the same kind of thing we were doing there. And so since we had that kind of a transition in there, and that transition was an outer element of the item where mine was contained in, it had the exact same problem. So fixed positioning has the exact same problem, but it has it with a different property. So both properties have a potential issue, and you need to know of these issues when using them. That's why when I use fixed positioning, like I said, you've got to know that transition properties will, especially if it's on a higher level element, these properties will mess with the positioning code that you're going to write. So you have to take those into account. You have to realize that. Sometimes there's not much you can do about it. You'd probably need to consider those kind of things when you're writing your components. But the best thing to do is make sure at least your components themselves don't cause these problems. Um, yeah, yeah. So, and I'm going to show another piece that was used that's used to determine certain things, and this is where the recursion is going to come in. So, as part of that, it's good to know potentially what items are there. So let's go ahead and I'll stop sharing for a moment. We don't have any questions yet, so good. So hopefully that made sense. This shows you how positioning can be done, how you can exactly center a div on the screen, and the potential things that can happen with different positioning types. Now, the next thing, recursion on the web. So you've got to realize DOM. There's the document object model that we have in JavaScript. So JavaScript allows access to what's known as the document object model. HTML is that model. So basically, for every single element, elements start at the body and they build outward. You can have multiple elements on the screen. You can have multiple elements, just below the body that are all different parts. You can have a top level element, and then they drill down all the way down to here. There's a property inside of JavaScript for every element up until the body element. Every element has a value in what's known as, I believe it's the parent element. We're going to see it here in a minute, so I could be wrong. It could be parent node, but I think it's parent element. And basically what you can do then is, if you're at a starting point, you can actually recurse upward through the parent element to try to find something within the DOM. And you're going to see how that happens here in just a minute, because we're going to this is the next code we're going to talk about. So this is where recursion in the web comes from. Now, really quickly, just to kind of recap what recursion is. Recursion is a function that calls itself repeatedly until it finds something. Usually it's used to search for something. There's really not much other purpose for recursion other than to try to find something, a value, a setting, a certain type of thing. It can be used to do searches, basically searches, any kind of search that you're looking for, you can use recursion to do. When I was in college, they taught us that I don't know why they taught us this, but they taught us that we should be very careful and not use recursion and stay away from recursion at all costs, because it's so dangerous. And I still to this day have no idea why they taught us that, because it kept me away from recursion for so long, and it is such a powerful tool. Yes, obviously it has potential problems that you can sit there in an infinite loop. You can infinitely recurse and basically just crash the application. I've seen it happen. I've got some stories. I don't want to tell stories here, but not this story, because it's about a particular place I worked at, and I doubt that person or anyone that knows this situation is watching that. But trust me, you don't want to set up into infinite recursion, because you'll basically just crash things. And so you do have to be careful when using it. I don't want to say you should just use it willy-nilly and just because it definitely has the potential to crash your machine, to crash your web application, to crash just about anything, because it'll sit there and it'll just go and go and go for forever. So when writing recursion, the one thing you have to do, and this came up from a post from someone I followed, where he said, if you want to know how recursion works, read this post again. And yeah, that's true. But I told him actually that would be infinite recursion, because you'd recurse on to infinity. So that's where this discussion point came from, was that post. And I've seen other posts about recursion, and so I thought it would be very useful to mention recursion, to show how powerful it can be, to show that it should be used. It should not be feared. It should be used. But and where on the web, because I think most people probably don't know. I didn't know when I first started. That when I was just using JavaScript just to do basic stuff, I never knew that you could use recursion. It wasn't until I started writing components that I started realizing that recursion was a possibility, not just a possibility, but a very good possibility, and it was very useful. So it can be used on the web. Yes, it can be used on the web. It can be used, every time I've used it, once again, I've used it to search for things, and you're going to see it here. So let me go ahead and we will do a share here. Here we go. Boom. All right. Let's make sure it's looking good. Okay. All right. So here we go. So this is, as I always mention, this is WebStorm. So this is my IDE. This is JetBrains, a JetBrains product. It's really, really great. I actually upgraded to the recent version in here. They've got AI completion, although luckily it never really bothers me too much. So every once in a while it tries to complete things for me, but whatever. But it's still a really great IDE. I absolutely love the IDE. I would not change it for the world. But this is my recursive function that we're talking about here. I will show how it's used really after I go through how this works, to show its use case and how I use it. But basically, you have, you're passing in the HTML element that you're starting from. In this case, we're looking for particular styles. So I was going to use, there is a property here. Let me see if I've got it. No, I didn't use it. There is a property in this TypeScript called CSS something. It basically lists every potential CSS style. The problem is, when I did that, the reason I didn't use that for styles, I initially did, is that you can't search for multiple styles, and that's what I wanted the ability to do. I wanted the ability to be able to search for if a style is this or this, has multiple values. So using that property, you can only search for a single value. But in my case, I wanted it to search for either one or multiple values for a CSS property. That's why I used record string number like this, instead of using CSS properties, I think it's called. Match all styles. So this right here basically is telling us, do we have to match each of the defined styles or only one? It defaults to only one. And then is valid element here then is a way that we can let the calling application determine if an element that is found is valid. The reason for this is because we had times where we would recurse upwards and we would find an element that actually met the conditions, but that wasn't the element that we wanted. We wanted a further element up. So you might see that in the code example I have here. It might use that or it might not. I'm not entirely sure. So basically here we'll jump to element has all styles. This one is not recursive, but basically it takes the element, it takes the styles, and this is what actually does get computed style and does all of this kind of work, all the work to loop through here. Basically, yeah. Style entries are just, you say object.entries of the record style, and it gives you the different entries, and you can actually go through the different entries and get the style and the value, which is this and this part. That's what style and value is. This is destructuring, in case you're wondering. This is in JavaScript what you've heard, some of the new language features known as destructuring. TypeScript allows us to do this automatically. So people using customers who are still using ES5 can this code can still work. This is to me, yet again, I'm going to go back a little bit to the why TypeScript. This is another reason I think TypeScript is so great, because you don't have to worry about what version of JavaScript you're using. TypeScript will back build the your code to make it work with things like destructuring. So you can write your code in the destructured, nice way to do it. And if your user doesn't have, the newest JavaScript language features in their browser because they're using an old browser, and you say, when would that happen? I'll tell you when that would happen. Government employees, governments in general, they are very slow at adapting new browser technologies and things like that. Usually, by the time they've decided to get a new browser, the browser's already 2 years old. I'm not kidding. That's how long it takes for them to get through all their processes. So you do have to consider that, especially if you have potentially government clients, and a good number of the jobs I've worked for have had government clients. I wouldn't be surprised if the current company I work at, Myosh, has government clients. And so you've got to consider that has to be taken into account. And that's why TypeScript's so great, because then you don't have to worry as much about it. You can just write your code and not worry about all the nitty-gritty details. Anyways, yeah, basically what we're doing here is we're looping through all the potential style entries, and we're looking for each one. We're looking to see if any of the potential values that are coming out, the values are this part of the record here. So the actual value property. So as you can see, we split them here. We split it on a comma, and then we can look through the potential values to find out if any of the values includes any in the particular style element that is found. So what it's doing is it's going through each and every single element. It's through get computed style. It's pulling the actual styles for that element. And then it's taking the styles that are passed in this styles property here and seeing if that particular value of that particular item is within the items that we defined. That's how it's working. So that's what element has all styles is doing. Now that's all styles. That matches all styles. There's also one it matches any if match all styles is false. So which is the default. So by default, it's going to hit here unless it's defined as true. I probably should have reversed that, but that's not a big deal. Here's the recursive elements. So basically, here's what I'm talking about. It is called parent element. I was right. Thank goodness. Okay, so once you do a search on the current element, if you haven't found the items you're looking for, then you check to see if the current element has a parent element. If it does, we call itself. There's the recursive element. You'll see the little icon over here. That means that's my IDE telling me, there we go, that it's a recursive call. And so we pass the parent element as the new HTML element. So we're going up one element here, and we're searching the next element. And that's what's going to happen. If it's not found here, it goes up, 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 and it works its way up the chain, all the way up the DOM chain, like I said, all the way up to the body. So if parent element is undefined, then we've hit the body, and we'll basically end up returning the body element. So that's the kickouts. Like I said, when you're doing recursion, you have to make sure you have a kickout. You have kickout methods. You have, if something is found, we're going to actually return from that. So you have two ways. And if you notice, this has a return as well. Since this has a value, an HTML element value, if we don't find what we're looking for in our search criteria, then our recursive call has to have a return, and the return is the call to the recursive call to the function. Since the function will eventually return an HTML element, even if it makes it all the way to the body is still considered an HTML element. So if it makes it all the way up to the body, it will return that element, and that will end the recursion, and it will go all the way back up the stack. Oh boy, it's been a while. I think it's the stack. I believe it's the call stack. There's two, and for the life of me right now, I can't remember the other one. Anyways, so that's how this works. So basically, if we don't find it, if we do find it, if one of these two happens and we find a style that we're looking for, and we either don't have is valid element defined, because that can be undefined. That can be left undefined by the question mark here in TypeScript. This question mark means that you don't have to pass that function in if you don't want to. So, but if either it isn't undefined or if it is a valid element, if it is defined and the call to is valid element returns true. So if whatever function they pass in returns a Boolean of true, then we go ahead and we say this is our element. And when that return happens, wherever it is in the call stack, it just fires all the way back down the stack. That's how recursion works. It goes and it goes and it goes and it continually calls itself over and over again until what you're searching for is found. And once what you're searching for is found, then it just goes, that return goes all the way back up the stack, bang, 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 and just fires all the way back up and returns the value to the original caller. Now, we will show how this is actually used. This is the component that uses. I talked about my overlay panel. This is the overlay panel component, and this is where it's used. So, final target here is, like I said, in my date component, there's an actual text box that contains the actual selected value of the date, and then there's the overlay panel that's part of the drop down that goes like this, and that is the part that actually is attached to, and this is why we need to do that, because we need to find things from the final target. So what we're doing is we're starting from the final target. What this piece of code here does is this piece of code here is looking for a scrollable div. So what it's trying to determine is the overlay panel inside of a scrollable div. Here's why it needs to do that. If you have a actually let's stay on this topic. I might be able to go back and explain it by showing the previous item. But if you have an item that is absolutely positioned and it's attached at the body element level, and that's the body element is the only scrollable element, especially if it's absolute position, then it will stick with the body and it will scroll with the body. So as you scroll, the body, the item itself will scroll with the body. That's what's nice about that. As long as it's not inside of a relative position div, well, even then it'll still work. It'll still scroll with the body. Anyways, however, in our application and in a lot of applications, there's many times if you'll see it used a lot of nowadays where you pop open something inside of a website and it's inside of another component. You've got a record component that's listing data and you're able to scroll, but you have other parts of the elements over here that you can see. I kind of wish that I could showcase the application we work on at work. I did not get approval, and I don't think they ever would since it's a work in progress. But I could show you what I'm talking about. Basically, we have a record item over here that lists that has all the different elements on there, all the different form elements, and all the data loaded into it. And what happens is if you have that item open and then you scroll the actual scrollable div, what this will do is this will pick up on that scroll event. That's what it's looking for. It's looking for one of these: overflow X, overflow Y, and just plain overflow. It's looking for scroll or auto, which usually is the same thing. Usually auto means scroll in most CSS settings. So that's what it's looking for. It's looking for any of these properties. That's the styles, any of these potential style properties, and either of these values, either scroll or auto. And so match all styles is false. So that means it doesn't have to match both of them. It only has to match one. So we need, and you wouldn't have both of them in this case. There's no way you would have an overflow property that would have scroll and auto. It would either be scroll or auto. And so that's what this does. This basically then it goes and it finds the next scroll. If there is a scrollable div, basically that's what it's looking for. It's looking to see, is there a div that has scroll set to it? If there is, we're going to attach to that. What we're going to do is we're going to end up attaching a scroll event. And whenever the scroll happens, it will actually hide the overlay panel. I did say I would show the isValid_element. We are using isValid_element here. Oh, no. Actually, that's part of the bsoft context. So this is React context stuff. This allows the user who's using bsoft components to pass in valuable scrollable elements through the context if you wish to do stuff like that. We had that issue because basically we had to We had to be able to say, is a particular element actually, and it may not be something inside of the BSoft components, it may be something outside. So that's why it's allowed through the context. And the context itself actually has a provider. I went through context. I think I've done a stream on context before. I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, but yeah, basically then you put a provider around, the main part of the app, and you can pass stuff into it. And this is one of the items you can pass into it. But as you can see, it does have the type. Oh, why did it do that? There we go. Element HTML element with a Boolean, or it can be undefined. So whichever it is, it basically allows you to check to see if an element, in our case, what happens is we actually had a name on the element, because we would have a wrapper element that was outside, that was not used by this. We had an element wrapper on the outside that would actually have a scroll setting on it, and it would cause it to pick up that. And so as you scrolled, the overlay panel would just stay there, and the item would scroll away like this, and it would never go away because it wasn't picking up the proper scroll. It needed to skip that and go one level higher to the next scrollable div. The next scrollable div was the one we wanted to attach to, and as soon as we put this in there, then it could find the right div, and then as it scrolled, it would go away. Oh, and that's the other reason we don't want to do this, because since we're using absolute positioning, we're positioning based upon the document, not upon the scrollable div. Now, if we did our positioning at the scrollable div level, then we could do that. But think about trying to write a component that does that. If you really think about that, think about trying to write a component that has to take all of those things into account. Basically, it would be very difficult to do that, because you would have to write all of this extremely complex logic. And when you're writing components, you want to provide the most easily usable feature available. Here, I think I can stop sharing here. Boop, and then we can just get back to this. All right. So you have to think about that when you're writing components and all those kinds of things. And that's why stuff like this really comes into effect, and really is very, very helpful. Basically, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to write something that does as much as it can without going overboard, because you don't want to have your components hard coded to work a certain way, because then they're not very usable. That's what makes third-party components reusable, is that they work in all situations. And so you've got to take it, and you've got to ask the question of yourself, is okay, what do you do? What's going to make it work without making it so overloaded with, code that might only be used in a very small percentage of the time? Which do you do? If you're writing a component library that's specifically for an application, like we do at Myosh. At Myosh, we wrote our own components. In that case, yes, fine. Go ahead, write the stuff in there that's going to help your component, that's going to help your specific situation out. But if you're writing third-party component library like BSoft components, I don't know how they're going to use these components. I don't know what situations they're going to be in. They could be using just a simple form that's just done on a body, done at the main body level, or they could do something more complex like what we're talking about here, where they have a side scroller. It's put in there in a little record component, and you're clicking on here, and it's opening multiple items over here, and you can scroll through your different records, and you know so you don't know when you're writing components like that. You don't know the situation that your components are used in, and that's how you have to think. You have to think about things like that when you're at that level. When you're at that level of writing, third party components, you have to think, what is going to make this work for everyone, not just for this one guy here who says, I'd really like it to do this. Well, that's great, but there's all of these other people over here who aren't in that situation, who need it to work this way, or who are going to do this. We don't want to sit there and write. I mean, you could get lost writing eternity of code that just tries to make up for every single person. A lot of times, like they say, a lot of times in trying to make everyone happy, you end up making no one happy. So it's a lot better to disappoint, this many people than to disappoint that many people. Make your components that work for the vast majority of people. That's one of the reasons I started BSoft components. Actually, I might as well talk about it for just a minute or two while we wrap up here. Basically, there's a lot of component libraries out there, but almost every single one of them that I've ever used, and I've used a lot. I've been in a lot of projects where I've used a lot of third-party componentry, and almost without fail, you're a bit late, but you saw the last fixed transform example. The recursion discussion reminded me of when I used to calculate function costs for recursive functions. I haven't done that in a while, but it was a cool topic. You use WebStorm, very cool, Tim. I do too. It is a great IDE. I absolutely love the IDE. The full screen resolution was poor, actually unreadable. Oof. So you're watching on YouTube, which is much better. Okay, yeah. I really am not entirely sure how, where the resolutions come in the different platforms. So that's why I always mention that I do have other places where my content is viewable. Yeah, I can't quite say how that is. I might want to try to make the actual font size a little bit bigger. That might help next time as well. But thanks for the heads up. I'll definitely try to correct that next time. Maybe I'll make the font even bigger. I already make it bigger for myself just so I can read it. So I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been lucky enough to not have to need glasses. But I'm about this close. I'm about this close to needing glasses. So instead of going the glasses route yet, I'm trying to just make the text bigger and make it easier on my eyes. So I'll definitely try to make that better next time. But thanks for the tip. But yeah. Basically, yeah, that's kind of what you got to think about. You got to think about it's not the font size. Oh, it's just really fuzzy. Interesting. Okay. Is it? Oh, okay. You're on X. Okay. If it's not really fuzzy other place, it might just be an X thing then. Because I've done this before with other platforms. I've done a lot of code shares at work when I do things directly with people I work with, and it seems to be good. It might be an X thing right now. I've had my fair share of issues with X and streaming, and that's why I mention my pin post quite regularly, because if I actually mention the links, X will block me. Well, they don't block me, but they definitely try to keep my post from being seen. So that's why I always mention my pin post, because I think YouTube and Twitch are better places to actually view the stream until X actually kind of fixes some of the streaming issues it has right now. Hopefully that's coming soon. Okay, it was clear on YouTube. Good. It does blur even on desktop. Yeah. Yeah, I would not be watching the stream on a phone. I don't think that would go good as well. But even on desktop, yeah. So yeah, so that's a good point then from both you guys there, from Bob and from Tim. Perhaps you guys may want to be viewing this on YouTube, possibly Twitch. The view might be better. You might be able to see better. So I would definitely do that. But yeah, like I said, you gotta really think of these things when you're writing components, when you're doing all that kind of work, because you don't want to do something that is either A, only going to work for a small number of people, or B, is going to be so complex that it's just so difficult to manage. You need something that's in between. Like I said, a lot of components. That's where I was. A lot of components that I've used in the past have pretty major failings. I mean, really, I'm not kidding. Even some of the really good ones out there, I've hit points where they just fail. And the reason I think they fail, the reason I think most third party component libraries fail, is because they're written for simplicity. They're written for the simple use cases. Is on YouTube. I hope X will work out and improve. Yeah, improve the live broadcast. Yeah, well, exactly. They say they want XTV. That's why I said XTV. Is it going to be as good as X streaming is right now? Because if it's only going to be that good, I don't think so. But yeah, that's why I'm creating BSoft components. I'm creating BSoft components because I'm trying to take. That's what I was saying. A lot of these component companies, the people that are developing components, they're component developers. They're not application developers. They don't work in applications day in, day out. I work in applications day in, day out. I've been doing application development for nearly 24 years now. So, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen all the problems, and a lot of the problems in the end up being that, they're they're made for about, I would say about 80% of the projects. But I think I've seen so many of the failures because the projects I work on are really complex. The one I work on now, for Myosh, the complexity to it is the fact that any users can develop any kind of form they want to. Basically, they have, and we're actually going to be, we're about ready to go live with a beta. But eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to start doing the work on the back end stuff, and we're going to actually improve the form builder. But what they have right now is a rather simplified form builder. It's form. It's got a bunch of form fields and things like that. But what I want to do is I want to make it a drag and drop form builder, which I have done before, by the way. So I want to have, drag, drop, and you can drag and drop, and you can actually see the form as it's done. And you can click on it and come up with a property window, which I've done before as well. And have the little property window, and you can fill out the properties and watch the actual element change right in front of you and see how it's going to look before you save it. Because right now, what happens with our current form builders, yeah, it works and it does its job and all that kind of stuff, but you have to go through and you have to make these changes, and you kind of go into there and out and in and out and in and out, and you're always changing different views and things like that. And that's where I want to really come in and really make things better. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's honestly what I love about working for the company I work for, is they always want to make things better. They always want to make things better for the customers. They always want to do things better. And that's the kind of companies that I do work for. And that's the kind of work that I do. I always want to do something that I want to make things better for people by using software. I want the software that I create for them to make their lives easier. Period. And yes, I understand that we all have to consider about money. We all have to make money. I understand that, but there is a difference between being concerned solely with money and solely with a company putting money in their pocket, and a company who makes good money because they care about their customers. And that's the difference right there for me. And that's what this company is all about. Myosh is all about doing good by its customers. It's all about listening to customers, trying to make things faster. I mean, I remember when I first came on, talking to the owner of the company. He was all about, our customers say this, our customers say that, our customers, our customer, our customers. That's what I heard him say, and that's what made me go, yeah, that's where I want to be. I want to be somewhere where it's customer centric, where we are doing things to make the customer's life better, to make the customer's life easier. That's what I like, and that's the kind of work that I do. That's why I'm creating, my own components, to try to make developers' life easier. Because I've been there time and time again, having to fight through all of these things, and you want to pull your hair out, because it's just so complex. Because this thing works really well until you get to that point, until you get to the point where you're doing dynamic form creation, and then suddenly, when your components fall down on the job in dynamic form creation, you're in trouble. Trust me. The last job I worked at, we used a third-party component library, and we ended up having to rewrite a lot of the components there. A lot of them. We were using a pretty well-known. I'm not going to mention the component library, but we're using a pretty well-known component library, and it fell down on the job again. And I had to sit there and I had to rewrite numerous components and write my own version of it. That's why when I came here to Myosh, and Myosh is basically doing almost the same thing, just in a different sector, I was like, we've got to do our own components. Yes, I know the initial time cost is there. I understand that. But in the end, you're not going to sit there and be fighting with bugs that you can't fix. Do you know how frustrating it is to have bugs that you trace it down, and suddenly it goes inside of a custom component and it dies there, and you're going, oh, then there's nothing you can do. What can you do about it? You can't do anything about it. You're not going to sit there and hack their code and try to make a fork their repository and try to make it work. And it'd be a nightmare. Can you imagine the nightmare of doing that after you spent time, or after you spent money on buying these components, to then go in and have to hack their own code just to make your code work? What's the point? You might as well write the code yourself, right? And a lot of these component libraries, a lot of these open source libraries, if you've noticed, make it to where it's very difficult to do that. they put a lot of structure around it. And yeah, okay, I understand. You're trying to do code reuse and all those things, and I get that. But some of these things I think is going a little bit beyond code reuse to the point of abstraction for the sake of not revealing how they do certain things. And I've seen that in a number of open source repositories. So yeah, you go digging in, you want to find out how this library does this, and next thing you know, it goes here and 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 here, and you're going, I can't see that that's really useful and is even very performant in jumping all over the place like this. But they're doing it so that they can say they're open source, but they're actually just trying to hide it. And that's something that Bsoft Components is not. I I make it as simple as possible because I want people to learn from it too, and it's free. I'm not asking for money for it. It's free. I am asking for people to come on and actually help, and if they want to, if they want to learn something and do stuff like that, I'm asking for that. But I'm not asking for money for it. I don't think I ever will ask for money for it. It'll always be something that's free, and it'll be. You haven't even had your coffee yet. Well, if you just came in, Bob, then this is probably hitting the end of it, hitting the end of of the stream. I'm just kind of rambling on for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to end up. But yeah, that's why I do Bsoft components. That's why I do the things I do. And I like doing it. It's something that's fun to me too. It's not just for those reasons. I actually like doing it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope it was informative. I hope that you learned about centering the div and how simple how it is quite simple. The few pitfalls that there are, and there's always pitfalls with things like CSS and with doing things like that. Recursion, yes, you can use recursion in the web and what it can be used for. So hopefully it was all very informative. I think it was, at least. All right, thanks, Tim. Thanks for the appreciation. I enjoyed myself, had fun doing it, and as always, you can always ask me questions. If you have any questions about how things work, you can always hit me up on X, hit me up on oh, div center is not simple. Then you need to go back to the replay, Bob, and see how simple it is. Or just ask me, and I'll share you the link to my fiddle, and you can take a look at that. So yeah, that's it, guys. I'll see you. Actually, I should probably do this one, right? I'll see you guys. Have a good rest of your day or evening time for those of you that